All right, this is a lecture for page 2 in the packet on absolutism. This is about the reign of Louis XIV. Louis XIV was the prime example of absolutism in Europe. All the other kings looked to Louis. They looked to him for leadership style. They looked to him for fashion style. They acted like him. They looked like him. They talked like him. They ruled like him. He was the it and European absolutism. All right, but before we get to Louis, by the way, this is a picture of him. So you can see the different ideas that he's trying to encompass in this pose here. Personally, I feel like I like to give credit to anybody who's willing to wear tights and flaunt it the way he is. But that's my own personal opinion. Let's go back a little bit before Louis to say what's going on in France. We saw that during the Reformation, they had a struggle between between the few people that embraced Protestantism and the overwhelming majority that accepted Catholicism. And so that's kind of where we're going to start off with. All right. This is the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, a little bit different picture, but this is the same sort of thing that's happening in France still, religious conflict. So for question number 1, the source of conflict in France is over religion. It's just a big struggle. It's not as seamless of a transition as it is in your other European countries. It's causing a lot of conflict, particularly because a lot of the upper class, wealthier individuals are the Protestants, and so that their very existence creates tension sometimes anyway. All right, in 1589, a new king came to the throne. This is Henry IV. He's going to be the first in a line of kings known as the Bourbon kings. Not because they drank too much, but just because that's their family name. So several individuals, including Louis XIV, are in this line of Bourbon kings that starts with Henry IV. So that's 2 and 3. All right, he was a good ruler because he dealt with the primary issue that was causing conflict in France, and he issued this law that was known as the Edict of Nantes, and this was going to grant religious freedom throughout France. So you could be Protestant, you could be Catholic. It really helped end a lot of the conflict. It was a smart move to keep peace within his nation. All right, he had an advisor, or his son had an advisor, that helped strengthen the position of the King of France. And this guy is Cardinal Richelieu. Maybe you've heard of this name before. If you've ever seen a version of the Three Musketeers, often Cardinal Richelieu is the main villain who's trying to take authority from the people or from the king and put it in his own hand. But it's a fictional character based off of a real life person, or a fictional character using a real life name. So he was the advisor to Louis XIII, who was the son of Henry VIII, and he helped solidify the position of King of France and make it more powerful. All right, he took power away from Huguenots, who were the upper middle class. He ordered the nobles to take down their castles. It's a lot easier to run and hide in a castle. And he got France involved in a war to promote Catholicism with their neighbors in Germany. They were going through some religious struggle as well. Anyway, none of those are things you have to write down, but the result of this is he increased the power of the king by making these unilateral decisions in the name of the king. He also expanded the influence of the church by taking France into a war with their neighbor, kind of to get involved in their religious skirmish that was going on next to them in defense of Catholicism. So the, I guess, grandson of Henry IV was Louis XIV. There's a great quote from Louis XIV. Said, "I am the state," and this is a great way to symbolize his view of his role in France. He also referred to himself as the Sun King, because as the sun kind of rules over the entire earth, Louis XIV ruled over all of France in a similar way. And he believed that, he was France. It didn't really exist or have much purpose without him. Real humble guy, you know how it is. Another example of his humility is he had this, there he is, I am the state. He had a home built. It's called Versailles. So Versailles, this is going to our vocab word here. This is a palace built by Louis XIV for him to live in. There's a few words that don't describe Versailles, like subtle, simple, conservative. These words do not describe the Palace of Versailles. Have you ever been to the Palace of Versailles? It's way over the top. As far as this is just one scene of it and one portion of it. There's a hall of mirrors. There's every square inch of the walls and ceilings is decorated with designs. The garden is amazing. This is just a section of the yard, not really known for its subtlety, but it represented who Louis was as a person. It fit him perfectly. All right, Louis became king at a very young age as a teenager, and so he wasn't really equipped to rule. So his advisor that made decisions until he was old enough to step in is another cardinal, another religious leader. This also tells you something about how influential the church was in France if the kings are taking as their advisors high-ranking religious officials. So this is Cardinal Mazarin. All right, Louis decided that since he was Catholic and he was the state and he's the Sun King, everybody should be Catholic. So he revoked the Edict of Nantes, the one that gave religious freedom. He said, we're no longer offering religious freedom in France, which caused a lot of Protestant workers to run for other countries. So the same sort of thing that happened to the Spanish. They expelled people that they actually needed, and that ended up hurting them in the long run. All right, another thing Louis did, as you can probably imagine, is he didn't work well with others, particularly the neighboring countries. He kept trying to expand his territory to the point where eventually the other countries of Europe got together, united against him in order to stop him from doing that. And they formed, if you look up our vocab words, they formed the League of Augsburg. So this was a union of European nations to stop Louis from expanding France beyond what it already had. So he acted without regard for the sovereignty of the nations around him. It kind of felt like maybe he deserved that others were inferior, and so the nations of Europe united together to stop him from expanding. It's kind of like what happens in real life. One person thinks too much of themselves. Sometimes a group of people get together to stop that from happening. All right, one individual in particular who took it upon himself to stop Louis XIV was the newly appointed King of England. His name was William of Orange. He was actually born, right around the corner from here. It's kind of ironic. Actually, he wasn't, just in case you were thinking. Pause for you to appreciate the sarcasm. But he particularly tried to stop the expansion of Louis XIV, and he's can add to what it already is a contentious relationship between the French and the English. All right, the French and Spanish attempted to unite their kingdoms together as Catholic countries, and the other countries of Europe blocked them from doing that. And that conflict that arose because of that attempt to overthrow the balance of power is called the War of the Spanish Succession. So countries trying to line together. This is the first time in a long series of times when countries are going to try to align themselves to offset the balance of power in Europe. It goes on and on and on. Same thing that's going to lead to World War I and World War II and a lot of conflicts that have gone on since. Countries trying to offset the balance and get the upper hand within continents or nations. All right. As a result of this war, which was won, or was lost by the Spanish and the French had to give up territory in the New World, territory that they claimed that was theirs, which was future Canada. They had to give up some of that territory to England, and that was a strategic victory for the English because that's going to add to their New World empire. It's actually going to help them benefit them economically a whole lot. And that's as a result of this war. Other wars were fought as well between European countries trying to struggle for control of Europe. Sometimes it spilled out into their colonies, sometimes it stayed in Europe, but repeated conflict is kind of typical in this part of the world at this time. All right, after Louis is gone, there's a couple of legacies that he left for the people of France. So let's look at a couple of those. So his legacy. It's a pretty important ruler, pretty significant. He's going to alter the course of history, and he's going to impact the development of France. And so let's look at a couple of those. Impact number one. Regardless of what Louis did, he made France a more powerful country. They started a couple wars. It didn't always end the way that they want, but they became a major player in Europe that had to be considered and reckoned with, and you'd want on your side, and needless to say, strengthened France as a nation in Europe. Another legacy left by Louis XIV, as you can probably imagine, debt. He spent all this money fighting wars and building himself this ridiculous palace without much concern for what that would do to France's financial situation. And after he was gone, France had to deal with that. Third legacy was France became a cultural center, Paris in particular, where people from all over Europe, maybe even all over the world, would come and learn, and they'd come and do art, and they'd come and just participate in the culture of France. And it still has that sort of aura today, I think, because of just the cultural history there. And that goes back to Louis XIV, because he drew so many people in. Even after he was gone, people were still drawn to France and the areas that he influenced.